Welcome to the second edition of EoZTV. I'm Elder Ziyon.
And I'm Mrs. Elder.
And I just came up with this really bizarre little graphic to say EoZTV. What do you think?
I love it. I love it.
Mrs. Elder has a thing about like really shiny type things like this. She just can't get enough of that. So
please replay it again.
Okay, one more time.
One more time.
Okay, we need to get some music behind this as well.
Okay, well, that'll come.
We'll get there. Anyway, let's go to the news. I want to say very much appreciate everybody that commented on the previous episode that we did last night. Chances are we are going to do this weekly, but there were so many good comments, and I wanted to improve it. So this is it's a work in progress, obviously, but we are going to try to get it better and better. We are in a brand new studio, Mrs. Elder.
We are?
Yeah. How do you like the new studio?
I love the studio. I remember painting every ounce of it.
That's right. It's one of the complaints about yesterday is that we had Mrs. Elder, you were not able to hear well enough because of her microphone. We now have two excellent microphones that we're using for the broadcast, and they are actually going through a mixer, which it's so impressive. It makes me feel like we have a real radio show going on over here.
Okay, well, let's make it a live radio show, and let's make it a live video show.
Maybe one day. This actually can be streamed live. It's the technology we're using through YouTube does actually support live streams. So maybe there's in the future we will be able to do live shows and have people ask questions.
I think that would be a great idea, and I'm looking forward to it.
Maybe. We'll have to see what happens. I do want to thank again everybody that commented on the previous episode that we had. There were some really great comments. People really liked the video, except for the sound quality, and one person also said that it was a little bit too long, which it probably was, and I think tonight's going to be too long too. But we got to work on that. And over here, Alexei, who happens to be a very nice man, very involved in the blog, said that the addition of Mrs. Elder as co-host is perfect, and she's charming too.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, but everybody says you need your own mic, so now you have your own mic.
And hopefully they can hear me.
Yes. Let's get to the news. Today, I noticed that there was a tweet a couple of days ago from something called the ESQA Media Office. ESQA stands for the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia. They were talking about tourism to different parts of the Middle East, and they were saying, hey, the top 10 destination countries in this graphic is number 1, Saudi Arabia, of course, because of the Hajj, because of the visitors that they do every year. There are millions. Number 2 is the United Arab Emirates, which, of course, is a very interesting place to visit. They have tons of conferences there. Mm-hmm. It's very interesting. And number 3 is Jordan, which had a little bit less than 3 million people. Something's missing from this picture.
You think?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
There's no Israel in this picture. And in fact, if you counted Israel would be number 3 because Israel had over 3 million tourists, actually 3.5 million tourists in 2013. So there's a reason. There's actually a history behind this. ESQA is, again, it stands for the Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia. Israel, if you know your geography, is exactly in Western Asia. It's about as far Western Asia as you get. But the certain countries that happen to be Arab really didn't want Israel to join ESQA. Mm-hmm. And Israel tried. Israel wanted to. But they did not want Israel to be a member of their organization. So what Israel did starting in 1987 is they said, if we can't become part of the Arab or of a Western Asia group, economic group, we're going to try to become a member of the European group called the ECE. Okay. And here's a 1987 UN document that talks about them wanting to become provisional members of the ECE, and it became permanent in 1992. Here you can see from the United Nations yearbook that the ECE decided to allow Israel to come in, although it's provisional that if one day the Arab countries decide that Israel can become a member, Israel could become a member, and they would lose membership. They would no longer become members of the ECE. Interestingly, when Israel originally applied to become a member of the European Council, the Arab nations didn't want them to belong to that either.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it's amazing. It had nothing to do with
Wow.
them, but they still didn't want Israel to become a member.
Hmm.
And they came up with a bunch of reasons. You could read it over here. It says that Israel should alter its policies so it could be admitted. There's the Economic Declaration of non-aligned countries expressed objections against the occupying power obtaining membership in any regional commission. So at least they're explicit about that. So Israel pursued an aggressive policy against Arab countries. And also, this was a nice one, undesirable political elements would be introduced into the ECE. If those Jews would become part of the ECE, those are undesirable political elements. So the Arabs actually tried to stop Israel from becoming part of this. But the UN, knowing that Israel is there physically, has to be able to come up with infographics that don't look like they discriminate against Israel, because it still is the UN and Israel is still a member state. And what they came up with, as you see from this tweet, is instead of calling this region Western Asia or calling it the Middle East, as everybody else calls it, they call it the Arab region. When they call it the Arab region, that way they could exclude Israel.
How convenient.
Yeah, so that works out very nicely for them. So they could talk about all these statistics about, and there are other tweets. If you look at a Twitter search on the words Arab region, they'll talk about things like forced migration or women's rights in the region. And obviously, they can't be talking about Israel because these aren't problems that Israel has. So if they would include Israel, if they would talk about the Middle East, every single time they talk about problems, they're going to have to say, except for Israel. Yes, there are no women's rights, well, except for Israel. And they don't want to do that.
No.
So it's much easier for them to just say Arab region. And Israel is clearly not an Arab country, so they can exclude them happily. And Israel is in the European part. And the same thing happens with sports, by the way. In fact, many, many years ago, Israel was part of some like European football games, soccer games. And this is, again, in the 60s. And finally, the Arabs would just not even go against them. So they would all forfeit, and Israel would win championships. It was very funny. Finally,
go Israel.
Finally, they got together and said, "This is no good. We want to be able to play. We don't want Israel to play." And Israel ends up now in the European leagues. I don't think Israel's too upset over that. They like playing, and the same sort of thing with everything: Eurovision, the song contest, everything like that. Israel is there, but it physically is still in Western Asia, and it's very interesting to see how the UN tries to ignore that fact. Next story is a sad story.
Oh yeah.
As people probably know, on Sunday, a Jewish woman was murdered because she was a Jew, and in her house, an Arab terrorist broke into her house, stabbed her multiple times in front of her children.
Unbelievable.
There's a newspaper as well as a website called Quds N, a Palestinian newspaper. They came up with this graphic to celebrate the terror attack. It happened in the town of Otniel, and that's what it says in big letters, where the last letter they turn into a knife. But it's they were very happy about the terror attack of Otniel, and that's what this poster is coming to commemorate, including, of course, the Palestinian flag on the handle of the dagger, of the murdering dagger. This is not even the most disgusting part. The most disgusting part is if you go to their Facebook page, you look at the comments of the people that are talking about it. Nobody, except for there's one Israeli that actually wrote in Arabic over here, but nobody has a problem with glorifying the murder of a woman in front of her kids. It says, here's one, "Oh God, blind the eyes of the Zionists and their agents about this hero." In other words, make sure that the hero gets away, that the murderer gets away. And there are other ones that ask for the victim to go to hell. It's just unbelievable. Wow. There's really God burn in the fire of hell. They're talking about her. It's just unreal, and never. And then again, this is a story that just doesn't get reported. It's one thing to say, okay, there's some idiots on Facebook that are against, that hate Jews. That's fine. There's some idiots that hate Arabs that say bad things too. That's fine. But you never find in these forums anybody arguing against it. You're never going to find an Arab that's willing to stand up and say, hold on a second, you just murdered a woman, an unarmed woman. She's not a soldier. What are you doing? Nobody says that.
I know, that's unbelievable.
And that is the single most unreported story from the Arab world, and it's mostly because the media wants to make things sound even-handed. Well, there are good Jews, bad Jews, good Arabs, bad Arabs, but you're never going to find, except for the ones that live in Israel, or the one, there are a few exceptions, but they just don't even bother talking in Arabic anymore. So they talk in, they speak in English or in Hebrew. But in Arabic, you're just not going to find the disgust at a terror attack like this.
I know that is just unbelievable.
And this is just one tiny example. It happens all the time. Every attack, you'll see stuff like this happening.
Wow.
Moving on, here's another interesting story that comes from the UN today, actually. On the 15th, a couple days ago, the Secretary General presented a plan of action to prevent violent extremism. He presented this to the General Assembly. So you think, wow, the UN is going to be working against terrorism, what they call violent extremism. This is great. If you look at the actual document, and it's a 22-page document, they talk about lots of stuff. And they talk about how the extremists become extremists, and etc. There's one word missing. It doesn't say anything about Islam.
Wow.
It doesn't say anything about Muslims.
How convenient.
Except for the Islamic State in Iraq and Levant. It talks about that. But it doesn't say anything about that there's any relationship whatsoever between Islam and violent extremists. Apparently, it's a huge coincidence that all these groups that they're talking about, and they list them, Islamic State in Iraq and Levant, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, just by sheer coincidence, they all share an extremist Islamist philosophy. It gets a little bit worse. If you look at the details of what the UN plans to do about this, first they have to talk about what the drivers are. And here are their list of drivers, and it's just so insane. It says there's the lack of socioeconomic opportunities. It's because you don't have a job that you decide to start murdering people and beheading people and things like that. Oh, if you feel marginalized and discriminated against. I saw recently a video from Rabbi Shmuley Boteach when he was doing a debate in Oxford, and he said, the Tibet lives under occupation, and the Dalai Lama doesn't become a suicide bomber. Isn't that weird? Mm-hmm. If occupation is what causes these things, and of course, there's one part over here, unresolved conflict, they say, which seems to me they put that in specifically so they can blame Israel for the rise of radical extremists in Gaza and the West Bank of the Islam, but it's nothing to do with Islam. Of course, it's nothing to do with Islam.
Oh yeah, absolutely not.
Yeah, just because these the knife attacks they're calling it the Al-Aqsa Intifada, and they're saying the reason is because occasionally Jews go up and visit, like a handful of Jews go up and visit the Har HaBayit, what they call the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex, and that's a reason for them to start stabbing Jews. It has nothing to do with religion. It's nothing to do with Islam. No. Nope. Don't worry about it. So once the UN has this really bizarre definition of how people become radicalized, well, they also said it happens in prisons. So of course there are lots of people beheading people that were, the US has more people in prison than practically any country, but I don't see too many beheadings over here. But you know what?
I don't either.
You never know. Maybe it's going to happen next week if the UN is right. There are individual backgrounds and motivations, collective grievances, all of these things, distortion and misuse of beliefs, political ideologies, and look how hard they're trying to not say the word Islam or Muslim. Of course, the solution is within the UN. We have a United Nations Charter. We have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We have our own global counterterrorism strategy based on nothing, based on completely wrong definition of what the problem is. And, so if you do empower women and do gender equality, then it's going to go away. Don't worry about it. Everything will be great. The UN will save the day.
I don't think so.
But this is the way things are. The last story I want to talk about today has to do with the UN's the PLO representative to the United States. He calls himself an ambassador, even though he's not. Ma'ain Erikat is the delegate from the PLO to the US. He likes to call himself an ambassador because he wants to pretend that Palestine is a state. But of course, the US doesn't recognize Palestine as a state. Mm-hmm. But he doesn't stop him from calling himself that. That's not the only lie he does. On January 4th, he wrote this tweet. In 2015 alone, 179 Palestinians were killed by Israel. 85% were extrajudicially shot dead. Additionally, a new type of lethal bullets were detected. Apparently, the old bullets were not lethal enough. You know, shooting isn't bad enough because for the Jews, because when they want to kill Arabs, they have to use lethal, extra lethal bullets. I'm not quite sure what they're doing. Maybe they have little bullets that explode inside. Maybe they're made out of radioactive material. I'm not sure. However, this is what he said.
Excuse me.
Okay, to the credit of Dan Williams of Reuters, he called him on it. He said, "Please expand on your method of determining the 85%, and what is the new ammunition?" And Eric had immediately answered, you know, within a very short period of time, "I'll be more than happy to provide that information to you shortly. Thanks." Well, it's 12 days later. He has not given that information, as far as I know, to Dan Williams. He certainly didn't tweet it. So I mentioned to him, "Hey, still waiting for the answer. It's been 12 days. What's going on?" And I also mentioned to Dan Williams, "Hey, isn't this newsworthy? If an ambassador lies so explicitly, it's in black and white. He said he's going to give. He put it there. He said it's going to be there shortly. Everybody can see he didn't answer the question. He made it up, you know, or he got it from some source that obviously made it up. There's nothing behind it. And this is a person who calls himself an ambassador. There's a person who's an official of the PLO, and the PLO is what runs the Palestinian Authority, and it's recognized as the sole legitimate representative. And this is the guy, you know. If any politician would be shown to lie this explicitly, the media would have a field day with it. How come nobody's talking about this? And this is just a minor example. There are tons of lies that come out. I've caught, you know, in the history of the blog, I've found hundreds of lies from PLO officials, from Abbas and from Saeb Erekat, who is apparently a cousin. All the Erekats are related to each other. Originally came from Jordan and Saudi Arabia. They did not, you know,
implanted.
Yes, of course. They are immigrants from the last couple hundred years. At any rate, they lie all the time. And I'm not just saying that because I'm saying, oh, they're liars. No, I've proven that they're lied all the time. There are tons of lies that are coming out of there. But the media really doesn't want to talk about it. So there's one thing I think we should do.
What's that?
Is at least have everybody remind Dan Williams about this and ask him.
Oh, I think that's a good idea.
Because, you know, he asked the question, is it newsworthy? Is it worth a story that the official delegate of the PLO to the United States lies?
I think it is.
I think it is too. I think that I think Reuters, if they had a even-handed view of what a good story is, would talk about that.
I agree.
But this is the sort of thing that I think that our listeners and viewers have to be really much more proactive. You know, I generate a lot of content, but we need people to be able to act on it, to be able to take this sort of information and write to, your favorite reporters, your favorite journalists, your favorite news sites, and ask them, get relationships with them and ask them, hey, what's going on? How come this sort of thing doesn't get reported? What makes certain stories more important than other stories?
Well, then I think they should do that.
Thank you. I believe that's all we have time for today. So thank you everybody for listening. Please give more feedback in the comment section after we post this. And if you have specific questions, we can try to address it. I don't think we're going to be doing this every night. It's probably going to be weekly, but or as often as we can. But nevertheless, please give us comments. We can have a section of the show that we could call it a mailbag. People suggested that, and anything else that you think that would help this production, and we might be able to have some fun with this. So thanks very much for listening, and take care.